So Gold Star is the name of this game. The back glass is in superb condition, but the cabinet itself has got a few little marks on it. Someone's scribed the name inside here, Danielle, Antonio, with some high scores as well, so pretty impressive scores. Now this one has come from Italy. What tends to happen is Gottlieb exported a lot of these games, and they had to change quite a lot of the images occasionally, the back glasses, the play fields, just to make them for the Italian market. This one says manufactured by Gold Star, but I actually think it's, I'm probably going to say this wrong, but Ripepi, it's an Italian name of manufacture from 1976. So what we're going to do is open the back box up, have a look. It looks in pretty nice condition, the back box itself, so perhaps stored in better conditions than the actual machine itself, which is pretty poor. So let's have a look inside, see what needs cleaning. I don't have a schematic for this as yet, but it's a single player, so it should be a lot easier to work on. There's no reason why we can't clean and strip the score reels down, check everything's in working order there, put it together and see what happens. So unfortunately the back of this is locked. What we need to find is the key. Now unfortunately the key doesn't appear to be inside the machine, which is a bit of a drawback really. But we have got a few keys that may fit. So I'm going to try that first, and if not, unfortunately we may have to gently try and drill this lock out. So unfortunately none of these keys fit, so what we're going to try and do before we get the lockpick out is just see if we can try and prise this door open slightly. Now we don't want to damage the cabinet, but usually you can just... there we go. That was a bit easier. Wow, so inside the back of the cabinet, apart from the odd cobweb, it does seem quite nice. So what we need to do is clean off all this old grease and strip these mechanisms down. Hopefully we'll get it running pretty quickly. So your pinball machine won't start until all these score reels are nice and clean, because what needs to happen is that each score reel needs to reset itself to 0 before the game will start. So let's take the first reel out and have a peep. Now this is one that I've cleaned already. I'm not going to go into massive detail because it's quite a simple thing, but I will strip one down and show you. This is one I've cleaned already. Now I've not taken everything off, but I've done the basics. I've removed the score reel here and cleaned everything up around the back. But what should happen is that when this coil fires like that, it should skip on the score reel by 1 point. If you can see that. Try again, like that. So each time the coil operates, it should skip on. Now that's quite smooth, moves nicely. Let's pick out another one that I haven't yet played with. Pop that one back first. Let's pick this one out. Now it looks slightly different because it's got this over the top, but let's not worry about that just yet. So when we try and operate that coil there, and if you can see that, extremely slow. So that means that it's all greased and gunged up. So that will need to be stripped and cleaned. What I'm going to do is show you that on the first reel, so you can see how easy it is to do it. So there's a little piece of plastic there, you pull to one side, the reel then slides out. What you need to do then is remove this little circlip. Try not to lose it on the side. Then you'll remove a washer, which isn't quite flat. There should be then 2 pieces of plastic and a special washer which only fits on in one way because it locks to the score reel. So then you can remove the score reel, remove that, and then you should be able to remove the spring as well. Now, as you can see, this slides quite easily. That's because it's all been cleaned. So what you would do is get your baby wipe or your whatever you use to clean things with. You can see this one's already had a fair bit of dirt on it. Now this piece of metal here slides through these 2 metal pins here. So normally there's grease all over those. So what you would do is clean the grease off that side, open it, clean the grease off that side. Same on the top, clean the grease off there, open it, clean the grease off that bit. And then also this little bit here, which operates this little sprocket here that has teeth on it, also usually is completely gunged up. So get rid of all the grease and gunge off there. So it's really nice and clean. Give the rest of it a bit of a clean up as well while you're at it. Just make sure it moves nice and smoothly. So you should have that. Dead easy to put back together. Make sure that there is a little piece of, or little plastic washer that's on there. So make sure that goes back on first. Spring on next. Now this, you have to try and line it up. So I don't know if you can see that well on the camera or not, but when you push it in, the end tooth wants to align with the end tooth hole on there. So basically when you pull that in, it rotates left and right. You'll know if you get it a few tooth out because it won't rotate. Let's try that again. It won't rotate as far. That's calling me a liar now. Let's try it the other way. There we go. So that doesn't quite rotate as far. So line up the teeth so that the end one goes into the end hole. There we go. That goes all the way like that. So make sure you also clean up this piece of plastic. Make sure all the grease is off there. Clean up the score reel as well. Also make sure that, whoops, make sure that inside there, inside the hole, all the grease is removed. Pop that back on. Make sure you get it the right way around. Like that, so it locks in position. The next piece is the piece of plastic which only fits on one way. And your two other pieces of plastic. The washer. And then the circlip. It's not quite as easy doing it one-handed. Or should I say when I've got a camera filming me. There we go. So once it's back together, you should find out that by activating the solenoid plunger, it skips on nicely. That's because we've degreased everything. So that is the first step to making sure that these score reels operate nicely. There are loads of switches down here and down here which need to be gapped, or well, to check see if there's a good connection, but we'll come to that in a bit. Let's attack one of these, which is slightly different. First thing we're going to do is remove the circlip from there. Keep that safe. Undo these screws. Two of those. We can then remove this little board. That's out of the way. So what we're left with now is the score reel, which doesn't move very well. Let's pull this off. And then the spring as well. Now you can probably see better now. Hopefully there's lots of grease here, nasty grease, lots down here as well. It's very sticky. So even though it moves okay, let's just get rid of this. Now, what I don't suggest is that you just cover everything in WD-40 and leave it. What I use that for is just to try and make it easier to remove the grease. But I do make sure that I clean off all the remnants of WD-40 on there. It tends to leave a film if you just leave it on there and don't clean it off. And then the film, of course, can become sticky itself and cause all sorts of problems. So let's make sure we clean all that WD-40 off and all the old knackered grease, or the old hardened grease. And that should make it slide much nicer. There we go. So that's cleaned up quite nicely. Next thing is your score reel. Remove that from the back. You can see how caked in grease that is. Horrible stuff. So let's again clean all this, make it nice and clean. If you do want to use your degreasing spray on there, you can then clean up the bits, or even a bowl of hot soapy water. Put all the bits in there, clean all the grease off, just make sure it's nice and clean and smooth. Very, very dirty, if you can see how dirty that is, but a bit of a clean, much better. Right, so the next step would be to replace those parts back on as we did with the other one. Spring on first. I haven't quite cleaned this very well yet, but this is just showing you how it goes back together. So open that slightly and match up the tooth on the end of the cog to the end tooth on the holder bit at the top. Now, as you move that, it should match with the cog. So that's moving quite nicely now. There we go. On top of there would be your cleaned score reel. And then of course all the bits of plastic on top. What you need to do is, of course, there are two contacts here. Now these contacts rub on the back of this little circuit board here. You can see this one's actually got some bad burning on here. So we're going to have to take this off, I think, and clean all the way around here. And we may even have to see if we can put some more copper on top of here. See if we can try and get that a bit nicer and a bit smoother. Either that or we may have to replace it. For the moment, all I'm going to do is put this back together just to hopefully show you that it turns nice and smoothly. So, bit of plastic on there. Should now have got our little washer. If I can pick it up, the circlip which holds everything together. There we go. Oops, that's what happens if you don't hold it properly. Luckily it didn't fly off anywhere, couldn't find it. Hold it with one hand, use the screwdriver to push it on with the other. There we go. So now, hoping that that's going to be, yeah, there we go. Nice and smooth. Wouldn't run at all before, but now it's nice and smooth. So what we're going to have to do is, after we've cleaned these properly, is have a really good look at this circuit board. Now, normally you can just clean the copper really lightly with something very, very slightly abrasive. So a wet and dry piece of sandpaper usually, just to take the dirt off the top, not to go too crazy. But yeah, it has actually burnt the board. I don't know how easy it is for you to see that there. Oops. Try it again. Has actually burnt the board here. There's a bit of a hole in it. If I can zoom in on that. Wrong way. There we go. Let's move the camera a little bit. So here we do have a burn right through the copper. Now, I do have a bit of copper leaf which we can try and glue to this, and hopefully these two little switches will run over the top of there nicely without damaging it. What I'm going to do is clean this up first, see how bad it is. Because we do still have a bit of contact on there, but I think the copper's worn out all the way through to the main circuit board, which is not good. So, yeah, I'm still here. Now this is very, very fine sandpaper. I'm just going to go over it very lightly. That usually makes that nice and clean. What we'll do is we'll go over it with a bit of wet and dry afterwards to make it really nice and clean and smooth. I don't want to wreck it by completely taking off all the surface. But you can see the difference, hopefully, in the light there. Yes, indeed. One half we've cleaned, one half we haven't. So, we're going to do now is use this little voltmeter here. Just zoom back out a minute. Now I'm going to set this voltmeter to continuity, which should hopefully beep like that when you touch them together. Yes, indeed. I'm going to put one end, that goes to that one. I'm going to use this other end to see. So this copper trace here is nice all the way along. So it's sort of missing there completely, so there is no trace underneath there, so there'll be no continuity. So that definitely either needs changing or repairing. It will work here, but I would assume that the real switch will stop right in the middle there, and it'll not connect, and there. So that's no good at all. Oops. Works there, not there. That's probably where the reel stops, right in the middle. Let's look into how we can fix that. Sometimes we can clean this up really nicely and actually just put a big blob of, well, not a big blob, actually a little blob of solder in the middle so that it runs across the solder. Let's see what we can do. Bit of a close-up now on this little board on the back of the score reel. Now that is quite bad. So again, we would normally put a piece of copper on top of that and attach it and solder it on. The problem is the copper is usually quite thin and it may just end up pulling it up, damaging it. So what we're going to try and do is clean this completely flat, solder in the middle there, sand it back so it's nice and flat and smooth, and hopefully it will stay in position and sort that issue out. We can test for continuity afterwards to make sure it's actually worked okay, which I'm pretty sure it will be, so I'll update as soon as we get the soldering iron out. One of the main issues with trying to repair old Gottlieb games is the availability of parts. Now, I don't think they remake these boards, so we've got to try and fix the original. As we pointed out earlier on, what happens is these little switches run around here, and when they stop in certain areas, they tend to wear away the copper tracks, and unfortunately then there's no continuity or contact between the areas that have worn away. So the easiest thing to do is grab a piece of sandpaper, sand it down so that it's extremely smooth. Now usually what happens is the area around the damage on the copper is normally quite bumpy. It just makes it worse and worse. So sand it down so it's nice and flat first of all. And what we're going to do is get a bit of solder paste on these areas. What I'm going to try and attempt to do is put a thin layer of solder over the top of this damaged area and then try and sand it down so that it's nice and smooth. These little switches here, of course, are flexible, so even if there is a small indentation on top of there, these switches will move over the top and flex back into position. So let's see if we can try and do that. What we should end up with is something a little bit like this. So we can remove the solder at either side, hopefully by heating it up and using a solder sucker to get that away. And we should be left, hopefully, with a bit in the middle. Once we sand that down, more or less flat, hopefully that'll provide a good area for these little switches to run on. So it's always really important to check what you've got in the bottom of the cabinet. You often find keys or important parts, but unfortunately it looks like most of this is just rubbish. So we'll clean all this out, give it a hoover, and come straight back.